Guys, my fucking dog.
Is in jail? Joker's in jail?
Joker got in jail again. Okay, so he's been jailed in Italy. He was jailed in Palo Alto.
When will that dog learn? I've spent quality time with that dog. He's out of control.
Why did he get jailed? Because
he's a runner.
He's a runner. He's a runner. He's a track star. We send him to like the dog walker where he goes and runs around, and they come pick him up. But then the guy opened the van door.
He took off.
Took off. Anyways, he gets found. They're trying to call me because I guess my number is on the thing, which I hadn't realized.
You don't pick up?
Can't reach me. Well, I'm in DC in New York, and they put them in the kennel, and we get this picture. And Nick, you can post the picture, but because I sent it to you. Poor Joker in dog jail.
He's a great dog. But he is.
Wait, is he back? Did you get him?
No, he's back. We got him back, but he's back. He's out of jail again.
Honestly, he's only going to learn if he goes to jail.
You should get a little tag for him. Those little remote tracking
Bro,
tags.
that's not, I mean, it's great, but it doesn't stop him from escaping.
That dog, there's something wrong with that dog.
Remember when he came over when Sacks came over?
Yeah.
And the dog was like growling at him, and Sacks was like all hunched in the corner. Like
it's the only dog that doesn't like me. I mean, every other dog
What country was that dog trained in?
No, he's not been trained. He's not been trained. We have to train him. I mean, I get it. He hasn't been trained, but he's so cute.
Did you train that dog to hate white people?
No.
That dog is a little racist, I'll say it.
Let your winners ride.
Rain Man David Sacks.
And instead, we open source it to the fans, and they've just gone crazy with it.
Love you, Besties. Queen of Quinoa.
All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of All In, the podcast that you've been listening to for 48 episodes. Here we are on the precipice of greatness, 49 episodes in. With us again today, the Queen of Quinoa, your science ambassador, David Friedberg. Also on the pod, the Rain Man himself, definitely his dad lets him drive in the driveway, David Sacks. And batting cleanup, the dictator himself, Chamath Palihapitiya. What did we all think of last week's pod with Balaji?
I felt it got cut off too soon. I was getting into a groove with Balaji, and I'm trying to figure out how to pick that up with him because I thought that we were getting into some pretty interesting discussion towards the end, and we obviously ran out of time. Chamath had to hop off. So it would have been great to keep that conversation going with Balaji. I really do think there's a big question mark on like how does the decentralized web or decentralized social networks in particular work with respect to kind of that, recommendation application layer, which is effectively what search solved on the internet. And so I'm curious to keep the conversation going and seeing, what this means.
I made the decision to end the pod because Chamath had to go, Sacks had to go. There was a hard stop. And I was like, I don't want to keep this going without the other besties. And people were very upset. They thought I shut it down abruptly, but we had a certain amount of time and we can always have him back. So everybody relax. But I did look at the stats. We each came in with our, whatever percent pro rata, and he had double. So he had 40% and we all had basically
Which is
equal.
right for a guest, I think.
I felt right. Didn't it feel right?
I think it's important to hear when folks come on, what they have to say. He's a really smart guy, and, you can kind of just let him go and riff for a while. And then just react to him. So I think it's lovely to hear such a deep thinker think out loud, quite honestly.
Yeah. And even if you don't agree with him, I don't agree with him on a lot of his points about, decentralized everything. I think centralized works for, many things better. I'm curious, Sacks, looking back on it, were there moments that you felt maybe you disagreed with him more or agreed with him more and wanted to lean into a conversation? Obviously, it's very hard to have 5 people on a pod and only get a certain amount of airtime, et cetera.
Well, look, I think Balaji is a great guest to have on once in a while. I mean, it does kind of turn the pod a little bit more into a TED Talk. Definitely have that vibe, but the fans liked it. And I mean, Balaji should have his own show. I mean, he can go for a while. I mean, he's got a lot to say for hours.
Yes. And he has.
He has, and I think he should do his own show because there's definitely a huge fan base for it. And if people want more Balaji, I interviewed him for about an hour on Purple Pills, which is kind of the I don't know if you want to call it solo show that I do where I occasionally interview people on call.
So download, call in, and go check out Purple Pills. So yeah, I gave Balaji a little pep talk coming in saying, hey, listen, it's a roundtable discussion and I've interviewed you before and you can kind of tip into the monologuing and explaining very big picture things. So just try to pass the ball a little bit here. And I think he did adjust his game a little bit, but it's hard to have somebody like that on. I think you pointed it out, Sacks, that it's more like a TED Talk for him.
We're having a conversation and he's used to being interviewed. And I
Correct.
think that's a transition, but it was fine. Let's move on.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we'll start off with something we talked about on episode 9, which was Coinbase's CEO Brian Armstrong wrote a very very controversial blog post exactly a year ago. Coinbase is a mission-focused company. At the time, he was dealing with a never-ending debate inside his own company about Black Lives Matter, about social justice, and any number of issues. And he said, listen, the company is mission-focused. Our mission is to, make people more financially independent, literate, et cetera. And we're going to ban any discussions on our electronic communications. You can do things on your own time. And it was quite controversial at the time. We had a good discussion. I re-listened to our discussion on that pod, and we all universally felt like it was the right move. Well, he went ahead and picked up the hornet's nest. He did not have to talk about this ever again. Everybody had forgotten about it, and he grabbed the hornet's nest, ran into the end zone, and spiked it.
Jason, before you do that, can you say how many people left as a result of his blog post and all? Do you know those stats? Because I think
I don't have those stats handy, but it was a dozen or two.
It was 5% ended up leaving. There was a big article about it. This was, I think it was worth him doing a follow-up post. This was the 1-year anniversary of his blog post, and he was kind of giving us a status update. And what he basically said is that the policy had worked. So first of all, should we just review what the policy was? The policy was that they were going to declare the workplace to be politically neutral, that people would leave their politics at the door. They would not have sort of extraneous political conversations at work. That doesn't mean you couldn't support whatever causes you wanted on your own time or tweet whatever you want on your own time. But while you're at work, they would declare it to be sort of a political DMZ, like a demilitarized zone. Basically, all he was doing was reasserting the old center, the old etiquette of, hey, when you go to work, you're not engaged in politically heated. Yeah, you're paid to work. You're not there to engage in political activism. So that was the policy, and of course, the woke mob became completely hysterical about it. As it turns, and so then what happened is that Brian offered everyone a very generous severance policy if they didn't want to stick around for the
generous policy.
Yes, extremely generous. So they made it really easy.
Absurdly generous.
Right. They made it really easy for people to check out if they want to check out. Well, only 5% took the policy.
60 people.
Yes. And then on the heels of that, there was a gigantic New York Times hit piece against the company, the usual disinformation and slanders against the company. And then now we have this follow-up piece. And I think what Brian basically reported is that today Coinbase is a more aligned company because everyone who's there wants to be there for the mission. That's what they focus on when they go to work. He talked about how they had hired top talent away from other companies. I mean, basically, he put out the bat signal and people came running because,
they wanted neutrality. They did not want it.
People are voting with their feet to come work there.
They're fed up with the politics and distraction. And I think the employees were secretly relieved that he declared this policy. Basically, he took the heat on himself for the larger benefit of all the employees who just wanted to be there and work and not have to wonder whether they're doing something right or wrong because they're on the wrong side of a political issue.
Friedberg nailed it when he said in our episode 9, which you can go back to, Friedberg, you may not remember your comments, but you said, what about the employees who just want to come to work and don't want to engage in political speech? Now you're infringing on them to force them to participate in these discussions, and they don't have a choice because they need to feed their families, they need to go to work. And so Friedberg, I think you take a little victory lap there. He says in this tweet storm, I'll just read the third part of it, one of the biggest concerns around our stance was that it would impact our diversity numbers. Since my post, we've grown our headcount about 110%, doubled it, while our diversity numbers have remained the same or even improved in some metrics. So all of the hand wringing and pearl clutching that this would have a negative effect on the company has turned out to be wrong. Go ahead, Chamath, and then Friedberg.
I mean, if you want, I think it's important to set the context for what this is. There is a productivity war going on inside of institutions around the world, and what's happening is that people's personal beliefs are bumping up against what the mission and operational goals of a company are, or a university, or all these other places. And so this is probably the first big example. This is a $50-60 billion public company?
49 billion.
$50 billion public company that basically said enough's enough. This is our mission. Everybody else basically just needs to shut the fuck up. And I think that that's very important. Now, if they then go off and actually crush their goals, that's the one missing piece in all of this, because when that happens, then you can write a through line through all of this and say, okay, this is in part what allowed them to do it. So I think that the folks that, were really up in arms still have one small straw in the fight, which is that if these guys don't achieve their goals, they'll point to this as one of the reasons why. But
the
if
whole
Brian,
diversity is strength,
or
and if
you're suppressing free speech, that argument. But I think if Brian then goes and delivers a couple of knockout quarters and a couple of knockout years, then what he will be able to say definitively, which no one can refute, is we leave our politics at the door, we define our OKRs, and then we go and we build things that people need as a company. And then you go off and you can do whatever you want. And I think that that's very powerful for many companies and institutions.
Friedberg, you heard my recap of what you said last time. I'm not sure if you remembered it or you re-listened. What are your thoughts today?
I think it's worth just noting less about the particularities of what was said and the particular issue at hand here. And I would look more to kind of Brian's leadership style as an excellent example of defining and creating strong culture. Culture in an organization can give that organization what it needs to succeed. It puts everyone aligned in a specific way on how we make decisions, how we operate. It doesn't matter what his particular beliefs and opinions were, what to exclude, what to include in the dialogue and the discourse and the model for discourse within the organization. I think what matters is that he put a line in the sand. And he said, this is what we're going to do. This is what's in, and this is what's out. And organizations that do that and do that effectively generally win. They win more. They do better. The teams are aligned. The teams are more unified. And I think that definition may sometimes be controversial. And you'll notice that as companies get bigger, go public, they're larger, they bring in professional managers, and the founder or CEO steps out, they generally don't do that, right? They generally try to not do that definitional work because they're trying to minimize loss and not kind of take the bet on maximizing long-term gain and doing the things that they think culturally define or will enable success long-term. So I think it's a great example of leadership generally on how you kind of can be very vocal about defining a strong culture. Elon calls it corpo speak.
Right?
What happens? Like when they get bigger?
Meaning most companies, when they get bigger, they gravitate towards corpo speak. And then what happens is some cohort of employees who are really good just feel trapped in this kind of morass of mediocrity.
And by the way, look at Elon's, call it attrition rate, right? By the typical large-scale public company corporate metric of like how many people are leaving per year, you'd say, oh my gosh, something's up with that organization. But it really speaks to a strong culture. There's a company that's famous for this called Bridgewater Associates, run by Ray Dalio, $100 billion hedge fund, one of the best performing investment vehicles of all time. And they have incredible culture. I've talked about Ray Dalio's book, Principles, before, and some of the work he's done on this, where he is so adamant about getting culture right within the organization, how you operate, that they almost have, I think, a 30% attrition rate after the first year of people that come in. Because they not only try and screen for these elements of what they consider to be the right cultural fit for their organization up front, but then they also screen people the heck out of the door if they're not a good fit. And I think Elon has a similar sort of model. And, I think Brian, the way he speaks about the organization is a similar model. And it's about defining the lines. It's about being very crystal clear about what's in and what's not.
If you, as a CEO and a founder, whatever you believe, you need to believe in it strongly.
And you need to communicate it clearly.
And then communicate it, and then let people vote. They vote with their feet. They don't get to vote whether to change it. They just get to vote whether they get to stay or whether they go. And I think that that's a really smart
I think that's
thing.
well said. Yeah.
I think there's one other issue here, Jake Allen. This goes back to your point about why did Brian have to bring this back up? Was it unnecessary? Did he spike the hornet's nest in the end zone? Here's why I think it was necessary. If you go to point 7 and 8 of his tweet storm, he says, it was the most positive reaction I've gotten from any change I've made in the history of the company, which is saying something. How could something be so negative in the press, but turn out to be incredibly positive with every stakeholder? 95% of employees. Privately, all the investors were telling him it was a great thing. And then what he says is, the only sense I can make of it is there's a huge mismatch right now between people's stated and revealed preferences, and we're operating in an environment of virtue signaling and fear of speaking up. So to me, this is the point of this tweet storm and bringing it up now, is without people like Brian standing up and saying what the truth is, that look, everybody wants this, they're just afraid to articulate the principle. We keep encouraging this climate of fear. And, the alternative to Coinbase, one of the other companies we've talked about is Apple. I mean, you can basically choose to be Coinbase or Apple. What has Apple done? They booted out Antonio Garcia Martinez because of a passage in his book that they knew about. And ever since then, the company's been roiled by boycotts and petition writing from the employees about some new cause every couple of weeks.
And eventually that'll show up in the operating results of the business. It's just a matter of time.
Right. And so why does that go on? I mean, I'm sure most employees at Apple don't want to be, constantly roiled by these petition campaigns. But they have to put up with it because everyone's so afraid to speak up. And that's why it's important that what Brian did, we have to basically recognize that this woke mob who's cowed everyone to silence is maybe 5% of these companies. And if everybody just acts like Brian, the problem will be over.
Well, we know what the trail of breadcrumbs is right now, and I think we should probably, shine a light on it, which is that 5% is exactly the same as Donald Trump. They just exist on the left, And there's more and more research that shows that just as much as we thought they were right authoritarians, they're also left authoritarians, and this is what we're seeing, that the craziness that everybody decries on the right actually also exists on the left.
And they just put a button on that before we pivot to the next story. Armstrong was very clear that the mission is about global wealth inequality. So staying focused on that, in his mind, is the high order bit and will result in the most great change. So paradoxically or ironically, all these woke people attacking Coinbase might do more for wealth inequality and justice in the world if they stay focused than if they try to tackle everything. And, this is a road to nowhere for Apple. I think, Sacks, you pointed this out about how if you were running Apple, you would fire anybody who does the petition, because I'll tell you where Apple is about to basically land. By enabling all of this woke mob inside their own company, by coddling them, addressing them, and not keeping them focused, they will eventually get to the fact that China has 3 million Uyghurs in a concentration camp, and those Uyghurs are proven to be providing, through slave labor, equipment and components to companies that eventually make their way to Apple products. Ergo, Apple supports slavery. And that's what the employees will eventually get to, and that will cause chaos.
But there's something even more closer to home. That's probably true, or could be true. I don't know.
It is true.
But the fact that Apple had the most important security leak in their entire software career just a few months ago is also quite important. You had a zero.
Why is it important?
You had a zero. So the iOS 14.8 exists because of why? Because a researcher or a set of researchers in Toronto discovered that there was a zero-click exploit in iOS that allowed you to basically turn on the microphone, turn on the camera, grab anything you needed from iPhones. It was the most secure device until 2 months ago, when it turned out it was actually the most insecure device.
So I
tend to think those kinds of technical mistakes happen when people take their eye off the ball. And I think people take their eye off the ball because they're demoralized with dealing with distractions.
Sacks?
Yeah, I mean, I think whether it's the Uyghurs or the security issue, it's a good example of the employees at Apple see the speck in somebody else's eye, but not the log in their own. I mean, that's the principle. And they would be much better off focusing on dealing with their own internal issues. But let's go. Can we go back to that article that Chamath referenced about the authoritarianism?
Friedberg, you got anything else on this issue that you want to, before we segue over?
No.